Hi, my name is Anna Potemkina, and together with my colleague Alena Karavai, we would like to start this small conversation about the role of art in the city. And I would like to start this first chapter from a small but very interesting story that happened in the city where I live and where I work, in Ivano-Frankivsk. So the story happened in 2015, and it was connected with a famous Polish artist, Paweł Altgammer, who came to our city with a project called Congress of Painters. The idea of the project, it was 7-day-long process of painting of the abandoned space of the former hotel in the city center. And everyone in the city could come in to that space and paint anything they wanted to paint. I have also to say that this action Paweł Altgammer made not for the first time. He has been making this project in different cities all around the world. So the idea is simple. It is mostly about self-expression, the freedom of self-expression, and this friendly artistic cooperation. And the process started, and from the very beginning it was really in friendly movement. People grabbed the brushes and paints. They started to paint all over the space. They painted the walls, the ceiling, the floor. And by the end of the first day, almost the whole space was covered with various paintings, starting with I Love UA, dressed and undressed bodies, suns, hearts, or conceptual writings, poems, drawings, and so on. After the first day, when other people started to come to the space and also wanted to paint on the walls, there was no space left. It's one thing when you paint on the white wall, and it's another thing when you paint all over another paintings, and paints get really dirty. So there actually started to increase some gloomy moods in the space. People started to aggressively claim each other because of the covering someone else's paintings. And the culmination of the conflict happened actually at the last days of the project, when the member of one of the right-wing organizations in the city accused the organizers in the anti-Ukrainian propaganda, and he applied to the mayor of the city with demand to ruin one of the drawings that was painted in the space. The drawing depicted the Cossack with a served hat, and that is how he explained the anti-Ukrainian propaganda. After the meeting of the experts, the painting was decided to be left, but the story is not about that. When I hear the story, I have few questions that rise in my head. First of all, why would such a famous artist, Paweł Altgammer, repeat one action in different cities, repeat one project, one after another, all around the world? Another question that rises in my head: why would such a friendly and freedom-promoting project like painting in the space together, why would this idea provoke such big conflicts? How did it happen? Another question is, do the artists or art institution need to avoid or smooth such conflicts? And the last question is, last but not least, what role did abandoned building play in this whole story? And of course, we can't tell the exact answers for all these questions, and there is really no need for that. I would like us to keep in mind these questions and to make this the basis for our next conversation. So keeping in mind that story, I would like us to refer to the discipline of sociology and to look at such concepts as community and public space, social interactions and social connections. So what does actually make city a city, and how did the image of the city change through the historical perspective? I mentioned sociology for a reason, because this discipline starts at the times of the massive urbanization, when a lot of people are moving from the villages to the cities at the same time, and they find themselves in the cities, in the space where they have to socialize with people with whom they have nothing to do in common, and they have nothing in common at all. And despite the fact that the city was always, right now, it's associated with the image of opportunity and liberalization. Actually, for psychologists and sociologists, the city is a rather gloomy place to be. And the city is defined as a space of two rupture. The first rupture is the general misunderstanding of your purpose in life that might happen in the head of the person, of every person actually. And the second rupture is this lack of prior connection with people who are around you. This is something that is very different if we compare with the village as a space where people have connection between communities, between families. So the city is actually a real melting pot of different religions, different classes, culture, political contradictions, social contradictions, and so on. And the city is shaped by these intersections of trade capitalism, fine art, careless cosmopolitans, exploitation, prostitution, and deportation. And we can feel tension everywhere in the city. There is also one important thing to notice, that the big cities, especially the capitals, are these spaces, these platforms on which the political minorities can become visible. And art is a really nice tool to use to highlight this visibility, to highlight this presence of the minorities. So coming back to this sociological theories, I would like us to look at the triangle and to imagine the triangle with three lines with such names as public space, social interactions, and social connections. There are also different discussions between the sociologists about which of these three lines has the priority. Does the public space is the space where primary connections begin and from which the community starts? And does the public space promote trust and solidarity? This is the first way of discussion. And an example of this might be the case when there is a new neighborhood and none of the neighbors know each other, and then there is opened the free laundry where these people can meet and where these first primary connections can form. And this is how the further trust in the community of the neighbors can appear. Another example from the cultural sphere, it can be the space where people gather for the free film screenings and where people from very different communities can first meet each other. So another part of the discussion says that priority has the social interactions and social practices, and they form the connections and they form the spaces. It means that artists or art institutions can propose to the people who live in the city such actions, such interactions or practices that can make people come together. In the next chapters, I will show you the example of such artistic interventions when the artist proposes the art form of walking through the city, through which people who had never seen each other gather, and further they can develop new connections and maybe find new spaces for this new community. So looking at this triangle on these three lines, we can maybe better understand how art can place itself in the city and how art can relate to the city. So just to quickly sum up, there are different levels of the art existence in the city. It can be community art, it can be art in public spaces, it can be functioning of spaces and institutions that are connected with the culture, or just the activities of individual artists. So speaking about artists, they are really the builders of the new real worlds in the city. The builders who can build social, political, and economical plateaus that can revive the urban structure. Artists do not usually have to perform in public spaces. Sometimes they have to protect the spaces from turning to places. Sometimes they have to apply tactics in their artistic strategy to make the autonomous social spaces. It is a good example of Dutch artist John van Heeswijk, who in early 2000s made a project when she worked in the shopping mall and made a public cultural space from the shopping mall again. So it's the twisting place into space. As we can see, artists from one point started to go into the social political sphere of daily life, and it happened not at once, of course. It mostly started from the 90s, and in art terminology it's called social turn, when more and more artists started to work with the communities, or they started to build communities. And the social turn, if we look at the theory of Claire Bishop, she says that it's connected with the criticism of art production and art consumption under capitalism. There is also one thing that I want to mention that I think might be helpful for us to keep in mind, is that community begins not where there is just a friendly atmosphere and some solidarity. Community begins where there are discussion of common destiny, where there is a realization of commonality of destiny. And I think this is something that we can keep in mind when we think of the tactics that artists may apply to their artistic activities. So to end this chapter, I would also like us to look to another side of the medal. There is always a danger of instrumentalization of artistic practices, the practices that were thought as one thing and then they're turning contrary to their intentions. Sometimes it happens that public spaces are turned into places and that communities become homogeneous. I have to mention here such art critic as Pascal Guillen, who uses the term of creative city. He uses this term as a model of the city which exists right now all over the world, and he points on the repressive nature of this model, because he says that the space here is opposed to the strategy, and the space, the public space, sometimes is very carefully thought out. It's so scheduled with public events that there is no space for spontaneous actions, for actions like people's meetings, for actions like political demand or political strike, which is a very important thing to be in the public space. The community art can also be instrumentalized because social workers can be replaced by artists. This is all that we have to keep in mind while thinking about community art, about working in public spaces, about working with community. And just to sum up, I have to say that working with communities is a very important thing, but we never have to think of this as making the community homogeneous, because people have to meet each other. People with very different points of view have to meet each other and maybe to have a conflict. This is something that keeps us out from our bubbles, because if we are in the bubbles, there are no connections and no solidarity between them, and no common actions are possible. So in such way, the public spaces emerges, gaining the political weight. And I hope in next chapter we will cover how exactly the artists and artistic institutions can work in the sphere of public spaces and in communities.
Hello. My name is Alona Karavai, and what I'm doing professionally you can read in the comments under this video. And now let's proceed to the next topic. And the next topic is very interesting, I hope. It's art communities. In the introductory part, Anya has already told you about this triangle which is holding the city together. And in this triangle we have space, social interactions, and social connections. Through this triangle we can look on the city, and let's concentrate on social connections and reflect how those connections are formed between the people or how they can be destroyed. And every time when we think about social connections, we would probably think about the word communities. The reason for that is simple. Communities is something like a vessel or something like a container for people who are not forced to be together, but who are choosing to be together, to communicate together, to interact together. So communities are the vessel or a container for organic and non-forced connections between people. Basically, somehow, for some reason, these people choose to interact, to be a part of the community and to stay together. But why should they be the part of the community? Out of common purpose. Or, as Anya has mentioned in her part of this video input, out of commonality or out of common destiny. This means that people stay together in a community because they have some common purpose or they would like to do something together. Let's keep that in mind and proceed with two cases of art communities. So let's proceed to the cases. As you probably already know, me and Anya, we are based in Ivano-Frankivsk, in a city in Ukraine. Being here, it's impossible not to know and not to talk about the so-called Stanislaviv phenomenon. It's a community of visual artists and writers who were affiliated with the Western postmodernism after the collapse of Soviet Union. The name of the scene is coming back to the old name of the city, Ivano-Frankivsk, because Ivano-Frankivsk was called Stanislaviv in the Austro-Galician times. Coming back from the name to the purpose, why the people from the community of Stanislaviv phenomenon came together. Actually, they also shared together a vision about postmodernism as an artistic approach which should move the city and Ukraine away from social realism. Some researchers would say that Stanislaviv phenomenon could become a gate of postmodernism for the whole Ukrainian literature. This is the first special thing about this community. The second special thing about this community is multidisciplinarity. The community of Stanislaviv phenomenon has been multidisciplinary long before it has been a trend like it is right now. Most researchers would know the Stanislaviv phenomenon as a community of writers, of postmodern writers, such writers as Yuri Andrukhovich, Taras Prohasko, Yurko Izdrik, and others. But also, Stanislaviv phenomenon as a community included also visual artists, such as Anatoly Zvizhinsky, Rostislav Koterlin, Yaroslav Yanovsky, Vesela Naidenova, and the same Yuri Izdrik, who has been also a visual artist as well. Both parts of these communities have been very visible in the city in the period from 1989 till 1997. Actually, it's pretty wrong to speak about both parts of the community because the community of Stanislaviv phenomenon has been functioning as one community, not having any borders inside of it. It was functioning like a horizontal community with a lot of interactions and interconnections inside of it, where everyone inspired everyone and where everyone could participate on the actions of other people. But coming back to the visibility and fruitful years of the community, when we speak about the outputs of the Stanislaviv phenomenon, so we can say that it has given birth to at least 2 conceptual literature magazines, to at least 1 publishing house, 1 local publishing house. It has organized 5 biennales in Ivano-Frankivsk beginning from 1989. And for those of you who don't remember, Biennale is a large-scale exhibition of contemporary art named for their host city and managed by a combination of public institutions in a 2-year circle. And also, but most importantly, Stanislaviv phenomenon could highlight and promote not only single writers and visual artists, but it could promote the whole city of Ivano-Frankivsk on national and international level. Let us resume. We said that Stanislaviv phenomenon as an art community has been holding together around one vision or one shared purpose. It has been interdisciplinary and it has been pretty fruitful, which means it has created many outputs. Besides of that, the community of Stanislaviv phenomenon has always been very rooted and close to people living in the city. one could and one can still meet the representatives of Stanislaviv phenomenon just on the streets, in the bars, at public readings, and can just meet them and speak with them. If you have art communities in your city, any kind of artist communities, please do support them, no matter how weird and provocative they might look like, because it's their job and their mission to provoke changes in your city and then to promote your city. The next case of art communities I would like to talk about is Tandem. Tandem is a big and always growing community of independent cultural activists who would like to work on international and cross-border level. Since 2011, Tandem has brought together more than 400 independent cultural organizations and supported professional development of over 320 activists from more than 160 cities. It's very impressive. Under this video, we will leave the link to the Tandem homepage so that you can get to know more. But what I would like to speak about is the main thing about Tandem is that cultural managers are brought together in tandems or trios so that they can collaborate more intensively, but at the same time they are staying the part of a bigger community and staying in touch with a wider community where they can exchange in a more loose way. What is special about this community is a very thoughtful facilitation by the community host. Apropos, this community is having somebody who is taking care for this community, who is community host, which is not the case in many of cultural and artistic communities. Tandem community is being facilitated by NGO based in Berlin, which is called Meet Ost. Community hosts are putting a lot of value of helping tandems come together and helping them discuss the points of their collaboration. For this, they use the instrument which is called collaboration canvas. Collaboration canvas is an instrument developed on a known instrument business canvas, and it can help both sides of collaboration to clarify the possibilities of their potential collaboration, to clarify and to see better what they can offer to each other. Sounds like a good instrument for twin cities and twins collaborations as well, doesn't it? So you can find the link to collaboration canvas under this video, and I do very much encourage you to take a closer look on it because it's a very interesting instrument. Well, and the main lesson from this community, from international community of Tandem, could be the following: the great benefit of community host and community facilitation. It's especially helpful and needed when we are dealing with the bigger communities and also with international communities. Last but not least, taking a look on these two cases, we have seen how many things are influencing communities, how many things can help communities grow, or how many things can destroy them. I was mentioning some of those things in these cases. For example, its common purpose, or its diversity, or its facilitation. But there are so many more aspects which are there to mention or which are there to keep in mind when we work with communities. Happily, there are some practitioners and researchers who has brought all of these aspects together and classified them in one model. For example, there is one model which is called community canvas, like very similar like collaboration canvas, but community canvas, which has been developed by Together Institute and Close Knit in 2017. And this model is being distributed as an open source. This means that you can just come on the homepage, download the handbook, download community canvas and work with that. Of course, in the comments under this video, we will leave you the link to the community canvas so that you can get to know more. But what is community canvas? Community canvas is a framework showing how to build stronger communities and what to do and what is not to do. Community canvas is classified in 3 sections: identity, experience, and structure. And each of those sections is having their own subsections. I'm encouraging you to explore more what is going on in each sections and also to find which aspects we were talking about in these sections, like for example, facilitation or governance, or which sections we were not talking about yet. Good luck with that, And let's proceed further. So now, coming back again to the triangle between spaces, social interactions and social connections through which we can look in the city. We were speaking now about social connections and about communities which can be platform for such social connections. Of course, spaces do also matter. Apropos, communities are often or sometimes based on the platform of different art spaces. City is living from its vivid art spaces, and these art spaces can be functioning in different ways. Some art spaces are functioning like municipal spaces, some art spaces are private ones, and some art spaces are revitalizing old and abandoned buildings. Actually, it's a topic for some extra input, but I would like to encourage you just to research more about revitalization and also about the differences between revitalization and renovation and redevelopment, because those are very different approaches which are being mixed together. The revitalization approach is being used pretty wide today to create new art spaces. But it's also being criticized pretty much because, in the first line, because of the gentrification, because revitalization is often associated with higher prices. So we've been speaking about spaces, we've been speaking about social connections. Let's speak a little bit more about social interactions as a kind of glue which is keeping people together in this gloomy space, a city, as Anya was talking about. One of the pop-up temporary places for social interactions are, of course, art festivals. Many people might think that the main and the only function of a city festival is a recreational function. Of course, this function is a very important one. But if we are speaking about arts festival in the city, like really arts festivals or international art festivals between twin cities, there are much more functions. Firstly, festivals are the laboratory for the new, for new ideas, for new approaches, for a wider look on the world and for thinking out of the box. So festivals are the sense-making and innovation space. Secondly, and very obviously, festivals are bringing together people, often those people who would not meet without this festival. So it's a common space and also glue for the city. One more thing is that a good branded art festival with a good reputation are just putting your city on the cultural map, are just a brand for your city. They can promote and bring cultural tourists from inland and also from abroad to your city. So a festival can be a brand. And last but not least, successful art festivals are bringing also economical benefits together with them, are bringing more people, more money, more resources to the city. If we target international festivals fostering the interconnections between the cities, for example, between twin cities, all of those benefits are even getting doubled. Let us, as always in this video input, take a look at one of the cases of city festivals. Deep in southwest Ukraine, not far from Carpathians, there is a city with a strange sounding name, Ivano-Frankivsk. This city has about 200,000 inhabitants, few universities, a substantial old town with old buildings, and also a huge monument to Ukrainian writer Ivano Franko. The Soviets have renamed the city after him in 1962. At the first glance, it looks like the city has been overshadowed by its other neighbors, like Lviv. One could think that Frankivsk has little to keep young people from living, it has little to attract tourists from abroad. Little, apart from its very active, very lively artistic and cultural scene, which has been flourished since 90s. We've already talked about Stanislaviv phenomenon and also about Impreza Biennales, which were taking place from 1989 till 1997 in the city. And all of these events have definitely prepared the cities for the following festivals. like conceptual festival Porto Franko, which were taking place in the city from 2016 till 2018. Noted, every time when there is something really impactful happening in the city, it means that some initiatives and some events have prepared the city for these impactful things. Somebody have prepared a ground for it. Nothing is happening in vacuum. But coming back to Porto Franko, Porto Franko has been describing itself as an open port, as a postmodern opera for the whole town, and as an international festival, quote, in a small Ukrainian town lost on the border of warring empires and parallel epochs. Nothing to add, except of numbers. In 3 years, Porto Franko has brought more than 1,000 artists, like really 1,000 artists, from 15 countries to Ivano-Frankivsk. And it could really put Ivano-Frankivsk on the cultural map of at least Ukraine. The curatorial team of the festival was not afraid of provoking topics. And every year the community of the city has been negotiating, has been discussing on those topics. For example, in 2018, it was the topic of human body, freedom of self-expression and censorships in the arts. You can find the link to the homepage of the festival under this video in order to explore more. But I would like to speak further about the city festivals, and I would like also to speak about the critics to the festivals, because they also have some negative impact or they have some challenges which have to be overcome. And in this case, I would like to mention 3 aspects. Firstly, its ecological footprint. Recently, there have been pretty many researches about ecological footprint of art festivals and of music festivals, and all of them are saying the same. Everywhere where it's a huge stage, big crowd of people, and where it's especially open air stage, it's bad with ecological footprint. To keep the long story short, festival organizers should put more effort to the following measures. They should use and promote any kind of more ecological transportations for artists, for guests, and also for techniques. They should organize trash recycling on the festival location. They should avoid plastic as much as possible. And also they have to work much more on saving energy consumption and on noise protection. Secondly, those are challenges connected with nightlife. No doubts that a well-developed nightlife is a sign of a big, flourishing city. Moreover, a well-developed nightlife is a precondition and an integral part of the so-called creative city, according to Charles Landry and other researchers. But a nightlife needs respective organization, needs respective infrastructure, and needs respective systemic work of the city in terms of security, noise, and infrastructure. Otherwise, it's just bringing too much harm. Some cities have already recognized both the need of nightlife and the need of systemic approach to it, and introduced the title of the Night City Mayor. Night City Mayor is a municipal title used for someone who represents and helps to develop a city's nightlife. The earliest known Night City Mayor has been elected in Rotterdam, but later on also other cities followed, like Amsterdam, London, Mannheim, Washington, and so on. And thirdly, it's the future of festivals. The time of mammoth festivals, meaning here huge festivals with huge stages and crowds of thousands people, these times are over, both due to the pandemic and security risks, but also due to the fact that it's just out of the time. We got very well connected in internet. We learned how to get connected in internet in huge crowds of people. So now, when it comes back to the face-to-face meeting, it's high time to make them more meaningful. This means that the time for the community festival has come. Community festivals can have smaller stages, they can have more site-specific program and not universal one. They can also have more diversity in online, offline formats and can broadcast more, so that there is some offline proposals for a smaller group of people, but more people can follow the festival online. Doing community festivals, you don't have to be afraid of a smaller scale, because due to the smaller scale, you are able to concentrate more on the impact. You are able to target a deeper, more lasting impact. You are able to do less distance between artists and audience. You are able to guarantee more ecological and noise consciousness. Such community festivals can have an international component as well, which is important, and be an even better playground for strengthening bilateral cultural connections between twin cities. Well, enough of speaking. Thank you for being with us on this video. Don't forget all of the additional links under this video, and you are invited to come to Ivano-Frankivsk in a slow tourism matter, just to get to know the people and the atmosphere of the city. And I'm giving over to Anya, who will tell you about more examples of international art cooperation projects.
In previous sections, we already mentioned different ways of interactions and collaborations in artistic sphere that can happen in the city context. And I would like us to look in this chapter a bit closer on specific cases of artistic collaborations that happened between different cities. So I will start this chapter from first example. There will be 3 examples, and all of them somehow included also Ukraine as a country. My first case will be connected with the project that happened in Ukraine and in Poland, and it was connection between 2 cities, Kharkiv. The project was called Pobratymtsi, and it happened in 2018, and it was a month residency program as in the form of artistic exchange. It means that the main actors were 2 institutions. One of them is Zamek Cultural Center in Poznan, and another is Yermilov Center, the cultural center in Kharkiv, and 2 of them exchanged the artists. And the main idea of this project was that there are cities that may be called as twin cities that can be situated geographically really far away from each other, but somehow they are very similar because of some context, some historical context or geographical situation. For example, in this case, it's interesting how Poznan and Kharkiv can have similar traits because of their situation near the borders of Ukraine and Poland. So I'm telling you about this case because I find really interesting how the form of research can be a really helpful form in the cooperation between the cities. There was no required result as a result in artistic production or some art exhibition. The result was only the research. And of course, this phase of research, which was held during a month, it included some participatory actions like artist talks or public discussions or curatorial meetings or some interactions between the artist and people who lived in those cities where they came to those localities. But the main thing is that these long-term research phases are really fruitful base for the very deep and thoughtful projects to appear. And this is how also happened with project Pobratymtsi. Another case that I would like us to jump in is the case that happened in Dnipro. And it was the case when Dnipro residency, Dnipro is the city in Ukraine, Dnipro residency invited artist named Alisa Olieva to explore the urban environment in the city. So she was really a guest to Dnipro, and she was never familiar with Ukrainian context at all. I will just quickly say a few words about the artist herself. Alisa Olieva works and lives in London, and she works with such interesting genre of art as psychogeographic and audio walks, and also participatory and performative actions. And she uses this solo and joint walks as the form of art, which is really accessible way of interaction and participation for the people who live in the city. As Alisa mentions herself, her curious eye as an artist is something that activates things that already exist in the city and the things that are really obvious for people who have been living there for a long time. So her eye activates something and turns it upside down sometimes. So the project that she did in Dnipro was that she gathered the stories of people. It was the open call for the participants. And the participants shared, they pointed on the map the streets which were connected with their self-censorship. It means they remembered the stories, sometimes negative, sometimes positive, that were really important for them, but with which they could not share with anyone. So these were like real secrets pointed on the map, and Alisa made white spots on the map and created this personal map. She said she never heard these stories, but gathering these personal maps was something very interesting for her, because the streets can carry the memory, and there are no tablets, no signs about this memory sometimes, but when we pass through, we always remember what happened there. And this is some interesting way to work with memory in the urban space. Another way how she explored the city was that she used the map of another city, London. She used this map to walk through Dnipro. So it's a very weird but really helpful way to walk through the city, because when you use someone else's map, you find yourself in very unobvious places, looking at very unobvious things in the city. And I also have to say that walking itself is a very good artistic exploration method, because it is non-violent and it is anti-colonial way of directing your attention and attention of the participants, because you don't capture things and you don't appropriate things. You just make really small movements, sometimes very ephemerical movements, but with the help of which you can highlight things and you can shift attention and you can shift your understanding of the urban space in a very interesting way. The third case that I will share with you is the case where I took part myself, and it was in the frames of Tandem program. The project itself was called Urban Her Stories, and it happened in 2019-2020. And it happened not between two cities, but between four cities, which I find also very interesting. Four cities were Ivano-Frankivsk from Ukraine, Wrocław in Poland, Zenica in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and also Košice in Slovakia. The four representatives of these four cities are women. And when we started to explore and to research about the history of our cities and about the context where we live in, we realized that we have really a lot in common. But we decided to gather ourselves around one of the cities and start from city of Zenica and then move from one city to another. So what we did with the context of Zenica, and it's also interesting way how not only artists can work with the city context, but also cultural managers. So what we realized is that Zenica is the city that you can say about it that it doesn't have almost no streets with women names. So there are only 2 streets named after women out of 160. Even if you don't know the history and culture of the country and of the city, this is something that a little bit describes it. So with our project, we wanted to shed a bit of light on the unrepresented history from the women perspective. The history of the public spaces, which is something where not only men have to be present, but also women. So what we did, we documented the social, political and urban changes from the 60s, because we worked with elderly people, and we gathered their personal stories in the form of audio guideline. So when you put your headphones in your ears and walk through the city and turn on this audio city guide, you can hear the personal stories of these women about the streets that may not exist anymore, about the schools that are named after different people, about the squares that are already destroyed, about the monuments that are already replaced. And all of them are connected with personal stories. So it's really small narratives, not the big narrative that we describe, but small narratives that are really forming what we call history. We also worked with Yelena Subach, who is a Ukrainian artist, and because of quarantine, we couldn't bring her to the place, and she couldn't see actually the city. But she decided to make a collage through the virtual walks through the old maps. She also used the archives that gave her these old women, and she made this imaginary journey by herself and made really beautiful collages out of it. So just to sum up this chapter, I would like to say that sometimes the artistic interventions and artistic cooperations between the city can help us to notice those things that we don't usually notice when we live in our cities for our whole life. And this second eye can be something that activates things and make things really change in future.